I never believed in disappearing towns. The stories always sounded like the kind of legends people tell around campfires. Strange tales passed down from one generation to the next, growing more unbelievable every time they're repeated. But 3 months ago, I found a town that shouldn't exist. And what happened there changed everything I thought I knew about reality. It started when I inherited a collection of old belongings from my grandfather. Most of it was exactly what you'd expect. Photographs, letters, books, and dusty boxes that hadn't been opened in decades. Then I found a folded map hidden inside an old wooden chest. The paper was yellow with age, and the edges looked as though they had survived countless years of handling. In the center of the map, marked with red ink, was a town called Hollow Creek. I'd never heard of it before. When I searched for it online, nothing came up. No records, no history, no mention of it anywhere. That alone should have been enough to make me forget about it. But there was something written on the back of the map in my grandfather's handwriting. 3 simple words: leave before midnight. The warning should have scared me away. Instead, it made me curious. A week later, I packed my camera gear into my car and followed the map into the mountains. The farther I drove, the stranger things became. Cell service disappeared. GPS stopped working. Road signs became rare. Eventually, I found myself surrounded by endless forests with no indication that another human being had been there for years. Then I saw a weathered wooden sign beside the road. Hollow Creek, population 287. I stopped the car immediately. Beyond the sign was a valley, and sitting in that valley was an entire town. Smoke drifted from chimneys. Cars were parked along the streets. People walked on sidewalks. Everything looked normal, yet something felt wrong. The silence was impossible to ignore. No dogs barking, no music, no distant conversations. Just an unsettling quietness hanging over everything. I grabbed my camera and started walking. Every person I passed looked directly at me, and every one of them smiled. The same smile, friendly on the surface, but somehow empty underneath. None of them spoke, not a single word. The first place I entered was a small diner near the center of town. The moment I stepped inside, every person turned and looked at me. The room fell silent. For several seconds, nobody moved, nobody blinked, nobody said anything. Then they smiled. The exact same smile I had seen outside. A waitress approached my table and poured a cup of coffee. Her hands trembled slightly. Without any introduction, she asked me a strange question. Was I planning to stay past midnight? The question caught me off guard. I laughed it off, but she didn't. There was fear in her eyes. Real fear. As I looked around the diner, I noticed something unusual. Every clock displayed a different time. One clock showed late afternoon. Another showed evening. One appeared to be frozen at midnight. None of them matched. The more I stared at them, the more uncomfortable I became. When I asked about the clocks, nobody answered. The waitress simply walked away. As the day went on, I explored more of Hollow Creek. Everything appeared normal at first glance. There was a church, a school, a grocery store, and rows of well-maintained houses. But the people behaved strangely. Many of them frequently checked the sky. Others stared at watches. Several residents hurried indoors for no apparent reason. As evening approached, the tension spread throughout the town. I could feel it. Everyone seemed to be waiting for something. At around 9 o'clock, I found an elderly man sitting outside the church. The moment he saw me, his expression changed. He looked terrified, not surprised, not confused, terrified. He told me I needed to leave immediately, before midnight. When I asked him why, he stared at me for a long moment before finally answering. The town doesn't disappear at midnight. The people do. At first, I thought he was joking, but the look in his eyes convinced me otherwise. Whatever he believed, he truly believed it. By 10 o'clock, the atmosphere in Hollow Creek had transformed completely. Businesses closed early, streets emptied, curtains were drawn over windows, doors were locked. The town felt as though it was preparing for a storm, except there wasn't a cloud in the sky. At 11 o'clock,
Set your
the streets were completely deserted. I set up my camera equipment in the town square. If something unusual happened at midnight, I wanted proof. The old clock above the town hall ticked steadily. Each second seemed louder than the last. As midnight approached, the air grew colder. An unnatural wind swept through the empty streets. Street lights flickered, then went dark. The entire town vanished into darkness. Only the moon remained. At 11:59, I began hearing whispers. Hundreds of them, maybe thousands. Soft voices surrounding me from every direction. I couldn't understand a single word, but I knew they were getting closer. Then the clock struck midnight. The church bell echoed through the darkness. The ground beneath my feet began to shake. Buildings trembled. Windows rattled. For a moment, I thought an earthquake had struck the valley. But then something impossible happened. The edges of buildings began to blur. Streetlights stretched into shadows. Roads distorted. The entire town appeared to lose its connection to reality. House by house, street by street, everything started fading. Not collapsing, not burning, simply disappearing, as though someone was erasing the town from existence. Then came the screams. The residents screamed from inside their homes. The sound filled the valley. It was a sound I hoped never to hear again. Terror, desperation, panic. Silhouettes appeared behind windows. Dark figures pressed against the glass, trying to escape, trying to get out. And then they vanished, one by one. Every house disappeared. Every building disappeared. Every road disappeared. Within seconds, the entire town was gone. I found myself standing alone in an empty field beneath the moonlight. There was no evidence that Hollow Creek had ever existed. Nothing except silence. I stood there in disbelief. Then my camera suddenly started working again. Relieved, I checked the footage. The town had been recorded. The people had been recorded. Everything was there. At least, that's what I thought. As I began walking back toward my car, I noticed footprints appearing in the grass nearby. Fresh footprints. Hundreds of them. Materializing one after another, as though invisible people were walking around me. The footprints surrounded me. I heard breathing, close enough to feel. Something brushed against my shoulder. Then another presence passed beside me, and another. The residents hadn't disappeared. They were still there. I simply couldn't see them anymore. Panic took over. I ran. The footsteps followed. Every step I took was matched by hundreds of unseen footsteps moving through the darkness around me. When I finally reached my car and drove away, I looked into the rearview mirror. For a brief moment, I saw lights floating in the valley behind me, the outline of a town, appearing and disappearing like a fading memory. The next morning, I returned with authorities. The valley was empty. No roads, no buildings, no sign, nothing. Even stranger, all of my footage had been corrupted. Every video file was destroyed. Every photograph erased. Except one. A single image remained. It showed the church, and written across the front door were 6 words. We only exist until midnight. Months later, while searching through my grandfather's belongings again, I found an old journal. Inside, he revealed a secret he had never shared with anyone. He had once lived in Hollow Creek as a child. According to his account, the town had been perfectly ordinary decades ago. Then something arrived. He never explained what it was, only that everything changed afterward. The town became trapped. Every morning it returned. Every midnight it vanished. The residents could not leave. They could not escape. They could not grow older. And they could not die. My grandfather had somehow become the only person ever to escape. That was why he left the map. That was why he left the warning. Leave before midnight. I wish the story ended there. I really do. But last week, I received a letter. There was no return address. No stamp. Just my name written on the front. Inside was a photograph. A recent photograph. Standing in front of the church was the same old man I had met during my visit. He looked exactly the same, not a day older. On the back of the photograph was a handwritten message. Midnight is coming. Beneath the message was a list of names. At the very bottom, I found mine. And below that was a population count. 288. One more than before. Which means that somewhere, somehow, Hollow Creek is still waiting. And according to that photograph, it may already be waiting for me.